Hey fellow onces, this is From Once, To Once, For Twice. Let's do this. So, you find that Polaroid you're really interested in, and the question is, what do you do next? This video was mainly targeted at social media sites where you can freely interact with the seller to communicate back and forth. A little less applicable to sites like Mercari or eBay, although with eBay you do have a limited interaction to message back and forth with the seller, but with Mercari it's going to be a lot more difficult unless you're native to Japan. So strap in and let's get to the tips. Question number 1. Does the Polaroid spark joy? Probably this is the first and most important question. If the Polaroid doesn't spark joy in you, you really should think twice about buying it. On the flip side, to play devil's advocate, sometimes a Polaroid I've come across does not necessarily spark joy, but when I look into the history or understand or learn more about it, I start seeing the value in it, and it starts to build a story, and it really resonates with me. And so the lesson is, don't necessarily write off Polaroids. Do your due diligence with every Polaroid. If one really does spark joy in you, there's probably a reason it does that. If it doesn't, look into it a little more, kind of let it simmer a little bit, and you'll have a pretty good sense of whether this is something you should pursue or not. Polaroids are a big investment, so make sure it's something that really brings joy to you. So let's talk about basic level authenticating. What is basic level authenticating? The idea is anytime you purchase a Polaroid, that's supposed to be a unique item that was signed by whichever bias you're trying to buy. This is a way to assure that you're getting the authentic product that you're paying for. Again, this is more applicable for social media sites where you can interact directly with the seller via direct messaging. First thing to be aware of is what the actual signature looks like. And so part of this is due diligence. You do have to research what your bias's signature looks like and kind of get a sense of the patterns and what some of the normalcies are and what would be typically abnormal. The tricky thing with this is a lot of times sellers do kind of cover up or make blurry the Polaroid to kind of protect the uniqueness, and in the process they make blurry the signature as well. And so it's not unreasonable, and you have to kind of play this by ear a little bit to ask the seller to reveal just certain parts of those signatures so you can verify that it's authentic. Some sellers may not be too excited to do that little extra work for you, but at the end of the day, if you're looking to make sure you're purchasing something that's verified, I think this is important to do. The second thing is to make sure they show you the back of the Polaroid, and this is just to verify that it is indeed a Polaroid. Midway through 2020, they put a sign on the back of the Polaroid that read, "Don't put in mouth." So please, don't put in your mouth. So if you have a Polaroid from an era that's in 2016, like Cheer Up, and it has that label on it, it's probably printed in 2020, so that would probably not be authentic. So it's really important to take a look at the back of the Polaroid. A lot of sites that are selling, like on Mercari, they usually just have the front and the back ready for you to go, so you don't even have to ask for it, but that's definitely something you want to do. Another thing you want to verify is if the seller has the Polaroid on hand or not. A lot of times they will tell you up front that it's not in hand, it's with a friend of theirs or somebody else's, they'll be getting it from them soon. But in either case, one way to verify that they do have it on hand or have somebody who has it on hand and truly have it in one way, shape, or form is to ask them to write your name on a piece of paper next to that Polaroid and take a picture. A lot of times some sellers may not want to put your name on a paper next to it because it may seem like it belongs to you. So what you can ask them to do is just, write a unique code. And so something I'll have them do is write their username with ABC123. So that way you verify that they do have it in hand and they're able to take a picture of it, or the person that they're getting it from has it in hand and can provide that request or unique code written on a piece of paper. Something I personally like to do, but can get in trouble for, and you kind of have to be careful with, is trying to ask about a Polaroid's history, kind of where it came from. I think it's good to generally know where it came from. Did it come from a promotional album sale, or did it come from a certain contest, or did it come from a certain broadcast media site competition? It's just kind of good to get to know those things because it helps you determine the value or the history of the Polaroid, and half of the fun is actually knowing the history of where a Polaroid's been and kind of what it's been through. But certain sellers may be not so enthusiastic about sharing this with you, so I think it's reasonable to ask, and if they don't seem too enthusiastic about it, you can always do some research on the side to look up old photos and etc., things like that, to try to figure out what era it's from and which set it came from. So those are some guidelines on basic level authenticating. If you're interested, there will be an intermediate level authentication in a later video. So let's talk about the meat of the matter, negotiating price. Negotiating price is really no different than negotiating price for a car. If you've never negotiated a price for a car, then well, maybe that's not such a useful example, but really everything is at play. And it kind of depends on how you want to approach the situation. Sometimes it can go really quick, and sometimes it can be pretty long and drawn out. But there are several factors you can negotiate, so you should leverage those items against the price of the Polaroid you're trying to purchase. With regards to general value of the Polaroid, you always want to have an idea of what the ballpark is before you go into negotiations. You don't want to start bidding at $300 for a $900 Polaroid. It could be insulting, or vice versa. You don't want to start bidding at $900 for a $300 Polaroid. Depending on how cute or pretty a Polaroid is, or how iconic a certain pose is, that really could vary the price of a Polaroid depending on the story or the uniqueness behind it. If it was featured in a video and they're literally holding it in front of them, the price would probably be higher and it would probably be a much more valuable collection piece. Typically, Mina probably sells the highest, followed by Chewy, and then Sana, followed by Momo. Beyond that's probably Nyan, Daehan, Jiho, Chaeyoung, and Jungyeon. That's not a slight to any of the members, that's just kind of how it is in the market. As a matter of fact, I would argue the lower your bias is on that list, generally the better off you are, because you won't be having to compete with much higher prices compared to some of the other members. So there are no exact rules on how to negotiate. As with everything in life, I think you kind of have to assess the situation. If the seller seems like somebody who's open to price negotiations, you can always start the bid just a smidge lower to test the waters, with the idea that you'll probably end up with what you're expecting to pay as the negotiations go along. On the flip side, if the seller seems a little tougher and maybe not as open to receiving lower offers, you probably want to start at a reasonable rate, and hopefully it doesn't climb much higher beyond that. But with those sellers, sometimes I find that you'll just give them a reasonable rate and they're pretty accepting of it. I think ultimately where you start depends on two things. One, what is your seller's situation? And two, what is your situation with your budget, right? Again, if your seller's being really difficult, you don't want to lowball them. If your budget is X amount, you really can't be jumping up higher by $500, right? So those are two things that you really have to think about in terms of how to approach the situation. At the end of the day, whether you offer the market price or whether you offer a lower price to start, you want to make sure you have good communication and are cordial with your seller. While you're negotiating the price, you can always ask about basic level authentication factors as well to help accomplish your needs. Make sure the signature looks authentic, make sure the back looks okay. This way it breaks up some of the monotony of dealing with the price, and at the same time you're able to fulfill those things you need from your end to make sure that you're getting an authentic piece. So not really sure if negotiating price is all that helpful, because there's really not one way to do it, but I think at the end of the day, be yourself. If you don't feel like you're good at lowballing, then don't lowball. If you feel like you're really good at negotiating pricing and talking your way through it, then give it a try and see how it goes. But you also have to respect the sellers, and because they may not necessarily put up with it. So just be aware of that. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you click the like button and make sure you subscribe. So this is From Once, To Once, For Twice. See you guys next time.